tonight. I'm Linda Kuhn, I'm Dean of the Honors College. I'm very excited to introduce our Spring 2019 lineup of the best courses at the University of Arkansas, our signature seminars. And we are going to have 3 signature seminars in the fall. Tonight you'll be hearing a preview of Professor Jay Greene's BS, which is getting a lot of attention outside of the University of Arkansas. We'll see what happens. You can handle it. But Tuesday, in the same room, same time, Professor Michelle Gray will do a sneak preview of her course on aging. And she's exercise science, kinesiology, biomechanics, and she will have students experience the process of aging by putting on aging suits. You can't believe what it's like. I can tell you, but you're not going to believe it. So it's sort of experiential. And then on Tuesday, September 25th, Chancellor Joe Steinmetz will be partnering with Distinguished Professor of Music Theory Lisa Margulis to present a sneak preview of their signature seminar called Brain and Music, Cognitive Science, Psychology, and Music Theory. So all of these are going to be super awesome. You're going to get in the most trouble, just saying. All of them.
Don't lie on these.
The application process, you have to apply to get in these because the job of the Honors College is not to keep people out, but to invite students from different colleges to join together in a seminar table. So that's part of the reason why you apply, okay? And the deadline for applying is October 25th, and it's all up on the website. All right. What can I say about Jay Greene?
Not saying?
This course is called College from the outside to the Honors College. I love that. I always say any press is good press. Yes, we're teaching BS in the fall of 2018 in America. How appropriate and how old-fashioned to have a course description that talks about the pursuit of truth. I, as a humanist, love this. Students, you got to take this class. It's going to make you better humans. I actually believe that. And in fact, Professor Greene has spent a lot of his career on civic engagement and civic issues. He is, by training, a historian. We must do that secret handshake at the Historians Club. He received his undergraduate degree in history at Tufts, where he went on from there to Harvard University and got a doctor of philosophy in government. He came to the University of Arkansas, happily for us, from the University of Texas in Austin, not a bad place, where he was in the political science department. He came to chair our Department of Education Reform, and he is also a distinguished professor of education. But Jay Greene is known all over the country for writings that provoke much comment on education reform and school vouchers. And in fact, his research has been cited 4 times in Supreme Court cases. I know, rock star! I have good taste, especially in teaching. I always say, I'm not a snob about anything, but the level and quality of teaching, I'm horrendously snooty. So I want to find people that are challenging, whose research is massively important and impressive, but also still like to work with undergrads. Sad to relate, this is frequently not the case in a lot of public R1 research institutions, right? The distance between faculty and students are often getting bigger and bigger. But this is not the case with Professor Greene, who has spent his entire life working for the cause of education and political philosophy. So, I will shut up now. We historians like to talk. And I'm going to turn the stage over to Professor Greene, who will dazzle you with how to spot BS.
Thank you for the very generous introduction, and I have to apologize in advance that I have a wounded ankle. So I won't be showing you all of my dope dance moves, but I hope I might show you something about BS. Thanks for coming. You might wonder, why should a university have a lecture about BS, or even a whole course about BS. It doesn't quite seem appropriate, perhaps, for a university, but actually I think this is the most appropriate course that a university could have, because I think the main thing that we might accomplish at a university is to distinguish between BS and truth. That is, perhaps our main goal at a university is to help you develop a BS detector, something that would help you identify what is BS and make some judgments about when it's appropriate or inappropriate. And that's what this course is going to be talking about. So, some might also think that it's a bit ironic that I would be giving a talk and teaching a course about BS, given that they might think that I'm an artful purveyor of it. But you can make your own judgments about that. So, there's a lot of BS. We all know it. There's a ton of it. And but we don't quite know what that means, and we don't quite know what to do about it. And so I hope that we might be able to make some progress in our conversation today and in a conversation in the course next semester, if you wish to sign up, to understand what exactly this idea of BS means. And I hope that if I ever slip and say the whole word, that you will not find this offensive. Again, this is simply a technical academic term that I'm using. So I think that BS actually has three main features. The first main feature of BS is a certain recklessness or indifference about what the truth is. So BS is not a lie. It's not a falsehood. It is something that doesn't care if it's a lie. Doesn't care if it's false. And that's a difference, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. The second feature, I think that's common to BS, is that it's an attempt to get people to do or believe something. That is, its intention is to manipulate in some way, to alter people's beliefs or actions. And the third key feature of BS is that it invokes authority in some way. It abuses authority in some way to get people to accept the BS so that they will change their behavior or ideas. Now I have to say that this is not completely original to me at all. Part of my interest in the topic of BS was fueled by a very short book written by a Princeton philosophy professor, Harry Frankfurt, called On BS. And he emphasized that BS and falsehood are not the same thing. But the other features are not things that he explored as fully. And so I'm hoping to expand a little bit on what he started. So this is all very abstract. But let's also just lay down some ideas here about BS with regard to whether it's necessarily bad. So as it turns out, BS could be good, it could be bad, it could be corrosive to our society. So the good part of BS, the good use of BS, is that to some extent we need BS to get along, especially in large organizations. And the reason for that is that we don't all agree on what is true and false. And because we don't all agree, if we spent all day long fighting over what was true and false all the time, we'd have a very hard time getting things done, right? So we want to obscure those differences a little bit intentionally so that we can accomplish some common goals. So that version of BS is actually beneficial. So some examples of this kind of good BS would be even examples of politeness. Bless his heart would be an example of this good BS. You don't actually mean to bless that person's heart. You don't think that person deserves a blessing. That's mostly used as a form of insult, that you believe that the person is foolish or mistaken or pathetic in some way. But that would be too sharp too pointed, too mean, and so we soften it with some BS. So does that meet the 3 features of BS? I think it does. When we say bless his heart, we don't care if, in fact, the person's heart should be blessed or not. We're not saying something that we think is true, nor are we intentionally saying something that's false. We're not wishing to curse the person. We actually just don't care about blessing or cursing the person. So there's a certain indifference to whether this claim is true or false. There is an attempt to alter behavior. That is, we're trying to convince you that someone else is a fool, and so I use this phrase so that it will be more persuasive, so that I don't sound so mean. And it does invoke some authority, in this case, religious authority, so that you might accept it more easily. So I think that does qualify. And we'll start thinking of more examples as we go along, and I'll want some examples from you too. I think that is an example of a good one, would be these polite phrases, or a lot of organizational behavior where we say things that we don't care whether they're true or not. Schools are filled with BS. Anyone who's worked in K-12 schools knows this. You have meetings where you talk about how every student's going to go to college, and you don't believe that. You don't care whether that's true or not. But it's designed to get everyone to work harder, so that we get more kids to college. So it's designed to alter behavior, and it invokes an authority. The authority is usually the authority of the school's reputation, or the administrator who is using that phrase. So that's good version. Bad version of BS is that BS is highly subversive of the truth. So Elie Wiesel says the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And the same is kind of true for BS, which is the opposite of truth is not exactly falsehood. It's really BS. At least falsehood pays some deference to the truth. It at least cares whether it's true or false. So it's at least acknowledging the existence of truth in its falsehood. But BS doesn't even care. So it's the most corrosive, the most subversive of truth. And then the ugly part of BS is that we have institutions in this country that are committed to the search for truth. That is, as one of their central missions, is to promote the truth. And the prevalence of BS in our society is eroding the authority of those institutions, because those institutions invoke their authority to get people to accept BS. So an example of this would be in journalism. Journalism has had many troubles, and I'm sure we can talk about fake news and what is fake news or not fake news. But the truth is that to some extent, journalism has brought this on itself. And at least in general have brought some of these problems on ourselves because we have abused authority to get people to accept things that we don't care whether they're true or false, that are BS, because we want to do things that we think are good for them. So, I don't know, a particular example of this would be Dan Rather and the Killian documents. I don't know if anyone is old enough to remember this, but when George W. Bush was president, there was a fair bit of controversy about whether he had properly done his military service in the National Guard, and there were documents that claimed that he had not, called the Killian documents. CBS ran a 60-minute segment that Dan Rather produced, or didn't produce, was the journalist for, in which they used these documents to make the claim that Bush had not properly served his military service. Now, whether he had properly served his military service or not is a little bit unclear, but it appears the documents may well be false, may well have been false, and it is also clear that CBS didn't check if the documents were false, although they said that they had checked, okay? So why did CBS do that? Why did they use documents that they didn't actually verify to make a claim Well, they did it because they thought that it was serving something that they kind of knew it must be true, right? The particular document might have been false, but the claim was true, okay? The broader claim was true, so that it was okay. And the trouble is, if journalists do this over and over, then people don't trust them because they begin to think that they're being manipulated by journalists rather than being told the truth. That is, journalists have to have a commitment to the truth, not just in some end, but in the particular means that they use to get to that end. So that would be an example of ugly effects of BS, which is undermining institutions that are committed to truth-seeking, like journalism, but this is also true of academia, it can be true of religious organizations, lots of organizations that help us in society be better humans have had their authority eroded because they have dabbled far too much in BS. So let's make this all a little bit more concrete, which is to go through examples of what I mean by BS. So the most obvious example of BS is advertising. And I think it's relatively uncontroversial. Everyone understands and accepts that advertising is mostly BS. I think it meets the three criteria, namely, the claims don't care whether they're true or false. So, does ultra bright make your smile get noticed? I don't know, might be true, might not be true. They don't care if it's true or not, it doesn't matter. The purpose of them saying it is not for its truth or falsehood. The purpose is to get you to buy ultra, right? It's to get you to alter your behavior, so that's the second feature. And the third feature of BS is that it invokes authority, the authority of a brand, Ultra Bright. Or perhaps sometimes they invoke the authority of 4 out of 5 dentists, or something like that, right? So, so that would be a pretty clear example. The Axe effect. I think Axe has changed its advertising campaign, but until relatively recently, the ad campaign was that attractive models chased teenage boys who used Axe deodorant and cologne spray. Did they actually do that? Well, Axe doesn't care if it's true or false. That's not the purpose of their claim. They just want you to buy it. And they're invoking the authority of showing new images and their brand to get you to accept them. And the same is true for all sorts of other advertising. When E.F. Hutton speaks, this is a long time ago, E.F. Hutton doesn't even exist anymore, but when E.F. Hutton speaks, do people listen? That Chevrolet commercial I put up there just because I'm annoyed having to watch it so many times before movies, like you are. All the people surprised that their cars, their Chevrolet that they had been driving around and probably knew were not that great, were actually the most reliable because J.D. Power said so. That's using the authority of J.D. Power that's the abuse of authority to make a claim that Chevrolet is the most reliable car. Is it true or not? Who knows? Who cares? They just want you to buy Chevrolet. Okay, so advertising is pretty clearly BS, but no one is really bothered by this, and it's not clear that anyone is really harmed by this because everyone knows this to be true. Everyone knows that advertising is BS, and so there's no pursuit of truth being undermined. There's no institutional authority that is corroded. We don't care if Ultra Bright's brand is tarnished by dabbling in BS. It doesn't really matter to society. A subset of advertising is politics. Politics is just another version of advertising. Instead of advertising a product, it's advertising candidates or policies. And so the same kind of sales BS that you see in advertising, you see in politics, and for some of the same reasons. Some of it can look really scary. So on the my right, your left, you could see the commandments, the 7 commandments from, anyone can identify its source?
Animal Farm.
Animal Farm, that's right, this is from Animal Farm.
So these are the founding principles of the animal society, but they get changed over time as the needs of the leaders are changed. And so do they really believe it's true that whatever goes on two legs is an enemy? Or do they really mean it when they change it to 4 legs good, 2 legs better? No, they don't. The leaders don't care in Animal Farm. They are saying these things to alter people's behavior, to get them to accept them, and they're using their authority as leaders to get them to accept that. And that's a pretty obvious, malicious version of BS in politics that we see in the novel Animal Farm. But the comment, I don't know if it's too small for you to read it, but the quotation that is on my left, your right, is from a speech that was given at the Democratic National Convention in 1984. That's a long time ago. And it was given by then New York Governor Mario Cuomo, the father of the current governor of New York. And this speech was so effective and successful that there was a lot of talk about him running for president, and people got very excited about Mario Cuomo. And the main point of the speech was that we, as America, are a family. We're a family, and we should take care of each other like a family, okay? Now, as laudable and inspiring as that may sound, it is BS, right? We aren't, in fact, a family. He doesn't care if we are related to each other by blood or by some other mechanism. That's not really his point. His point is to use the affection that we have for the institution of family to convince us to support other kinds of policies to help people who are not actually our family members. Now, maybe those are the right policies or not. That's not the point. The point is that he is manipulating us, trying to get us to change our behavior by using something that he doesn't care whether it's true or not. He doesn't care whether we are, in fact, a family or not. And I'm sure that in conversation here later we can talk about lots of other examples from politics. But in some ways, talking about BS in politics is not that interesting. And the reason why it's not that interesting is, first, like advertising, we kind of know it, right? We know there's a lot of BS in politics, and so we're not that bothered by it. Also, it tends to be the case that we find BS among people who we disagree with intolerable, but BS from people with whom we're sympathetic to be reasonable and acceptable. And so that makes conversations about BS in politics difficult. But we can talk about it, but it's not, I think, the most interesting use of BS is in politics. Now, another place where we have a ton of BS, and I already mentioned that organizations need BS to get along, and one of the ways that they use BS to get along is by having mission statements, right? Companies have to have mission statements, and they write these things, and does anyone believe that this is true, or when they write it, are they committed to the idea that this is true? No, what they're committed to is the idea that they wish it to be true. They want it to be true. They would like you to believe it's true so that you will alter your behavior to work together with other people in the organization to make this more true than it is. Okay? And so it's not entirely bad, but it is BS. Mission statements are BS. Strategic plans are BS. We spend a lot of time on these things, but they're pretty clearly BS. Okay, so these manifestations of BS in advertising, politics, business, they're not that worrisome, either because we expect them and they don't erode our search for the truth or institutions that are truth-seeking, or because they don't undermine authority too much. It's a little bit more worrisome in politics there because there is government needs some legitimate authority, and too much BS in government is corrosive of the legitimate authority of government that we need it to have. So that is a worrisome thing there. But do we really care if Albertson has a BS mission statement? We don't care. do we really care if Axe is using BS to sell deodorant? We really don't care. But the place where we really do care is in truth-seeking institutions. And so one of the places where the most important truth-seeking institution is the academy or universities, higher education. This comes about in the academy in a few different ways. First, there's a lot of academic work that is not careful about what causes what. That is, there are a lot of researchers in academia who produce findings, and they don't care if those findings are causal. That is, that something is in fact causing something else. They're not careful about this, and therefore they're actually engaging in BS. They're using their authority as researchers, as experts, to get us to accept a claim that they're reckless about whether it's true or false, and they're doing it so that we change our beliefs or behavior in response to the claim. Even when researchers are more careful about causation, what causes what, and I'll show you examples of this in a second, but even when they're more careful, academia is often quite reckless about what cumulatively we've learned from our calls to research. And I think this recklessness about what causes what, or this recklessness about what we've learned from causal research is facilitated in the academy by a postmodern view that doesn't find truth to be that important, right? Truth doesn't matter that much to a lot of people in universities. And so what's the big deal if we deviate from it, so long as we're serving some other purpose that's good, right? And so that's part of where it's coming from. Another part of it is that to the extent that BS is pervading business, it's also beginning to creep into higher education, into universities, as universities are increasingly run like businesses and adopt business-like language and judge their performance on a variety of sales metrics and so on, as if they were businesses rather than truth-seeking institutions. And that's another reason why I think we're beginning to see a lot of BS in the academy. So let's go through some examples of what exactly I'm talking about. So is ice cream a menace or a miracle? You decide. So if you look over on my left or right, we can see a very convincing scatter plot that as the amount of ice cream sold goes up, murder rate also goes up. Do you see that? Okay. So there's a very strong relationship between the amount of ice cream sold per month and the number of murders committed per month. Similarly, ice cream seems to contribute to drowning because there we can see that the more ice cream that's produced, the more incidences of drowning there are per month, and that's a fairly strong relationship there as well. On the other hand, ice cream might be of great help because as ice cream consumption goes up by country, their international test scores on these international measures of math and reading achievement also go up. So higher ice cream, maybe there's good and bad from ice cream. Maybe the kind of nutritional content, the kind of protein and extra calories of the ice cream help us think better so that we score better on tests. On the other hand, maybe it makes us harder to swim. I mean, your mother probably said, don't go in swimming for at least 30 minutes right after having some ice cream. So, maybe your mom knew something. It's dangerous to have ice cream and swim because it might make you feel weighted down and drown. And maybe that sugar rush makes us impulsive and we start killing each other as we consume more ice cream. So who can say what the problem here might be? Is there a problem? Is this true? Is ice cream a menace or a miracle or both? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, associations never imply causations.
Right, so these are correlations. They're not causal. We don't know. All we can see here is that ice cream is correlated with these phenomena, but we don't know why it's related. So what's like an alternative explanation for why it is that we might see more ice cream sold when there are more drownings or more murders? Why might that happen? Yeah.
Well, like on the graph, more ice cream is sold during the summer, and more people are also swimming during summer.
Yes.
So there's more eating of ice cream and drowning.
Right, people don't tend to eat ice cream in January, nor do they tend to swim in January. Similarly with murders, it's hot, people are out on the streets, they get into fights more, they might murder each other more, right? As to the why would countries with more ice cream production also have higher test scores? Any guesses? Yeah.
The countries that have people that can afford a luxury like ice cream also be the ones that can afford the education that people want.
Right, these are richer countries in all likelihood, right? So yeah, rich countries might eat more ice cream because they can, and they might also score higher on test scores because they can invest other resources in their success. This is a good example, an easy example, of how in academia you could make bad mistakes if you're not careful about what causes what. Right? If you're not careful about causation. But these are silly examples, right? No one in academia would make claims like this, right? Well, as it turns out, we do all the time. And here's an easy example. These are nutrition studies. And in nutrition, they have large population studies. These are epidemiology observation studies. So one famous nutrition study follows a huge sample of nurses, and they follow them for years and years and years, and they have them record everything about themselves, everything they eat, everything they drink, all their exercise, and we have full information on their health history and their health futures. We record as it progresses, and then people have found in these very, very large data sets that control for a ton of variables. So, like, you can't just like control for wealth and say, oh, ice cream is related as long as we can control for the wealth of the countries. Because just controlling for it doesn't capture all of the differences. So as it turns out, we can control for a ton of things about these nurses, because we know everything about them, just about. And then we believe from that study and from other epidemiology observation studies that certain nutritional interventions would be helpful for people. We thought that it might be good to have megavitamin E, megavitamin C, omega-3, dietary fiber. A lot of those things seem very promising based on observational studies of very large samples with a lot of controls for stuff we could observe. Trouble is, we can't control for stuff that we don't observe. And there's a lot of stuff that we're not observing too. Even if you control for hundreds of things, there are millions, in fact, infinite number of things that you're not controlling for because you're not observing them. You don't know them, okay? And so when we've tried these same interventions in randomized controlled trials, they don't work. So what is a randomized controlled trial? This is where by lottery, some people get the treatment, and by chance, some people don't get the treatment. So let's say it's megavitamin E, okay? In a randomized control trial, the treatment group would be selected by lottery, and the people who were in the treatment group would take big doses of vitamin E, and the control group would take a big dose of a placebo. They don't know that it's not vitamin E, it's just a sugar pill or something, okay? And the beauty of a randomized control trial is that it isolates causation. The reason why it isolates causation is because on average, everyone in the treatment and control group should be identical. Right? If we have a large enough sample, on average they should be alike, because the only thing that distinguishes whether they were in the treatment or the control group is chance, right? On average, they should be like each other. It's as if we made twins of them, although that's a whole nother story. If you go see Three Identical Strangers, that'll blow your mind. But it's as if we made doppelgangers, of everyone, and we could compare them to see if they do better if they take big doses of vitamin E or not. And when we do these kind of randomized trials, we don't observe any of the benefits that we thought we'd see based on these population observational studies. And yet, this is very commonly how academic work is done, which is to produce a lot of research based on observing populations, controlling for observables, and saying, well, I think I've controlled for a lot of stuff, it's probably enough. And so that has a certain recklessness about whether this is a true causal claim or not. It's designed to get people to alter their behavior, to perhaps take mega doses of vitamin E. And it invokes authority to get us to do that, which is, I'm a scientist, I researched this, I think you should do this. Okay. We also see it in other areas of academia, not just in nutrition. So I've been doing work on the educational effects of art experiences, and pretty often we see the table up there in yellow, which shows that the more years of art courses the students have in high school, the higher their SAT scores are, right? And this is used all the time. Americans for the Arts, which is a big advocacy organization for the arts, they wave this around every time they can to show that it's really important that we have art courses in high school and that we get students to take more art courses because it helps their SAT scores go up. So again, what's the problem here? Why might this not be a true relationship? Is it a true relationship? Do we know it's true? Yeah.
It can be just based on students who are more dedicated to academics who are probably going to stay in like a specific area.
Right? It might be if you take more years of anything, because you're like even sticking around to take more courses. Or maybe the arts just attract really cool people. So do the arts attract awesome people, or do the arts make people awesome? Right? It's hard to unravel that just by observing the relationship between how many years of art people take and their SAT scores. So we need some sort of strategy for isolating the causal effect of the art on the SAT score or some other number. But it's not just that. We also have, there were all sorts of music interventions and books sold based on the claimed Mozart effect, and I'm confident that the Chancellor and Professor Margulis will not be touting this. And the Mozart effect claimed that if you listen to Mozart, that it makes your math scores or academic ability somehow go up. Okay. And I'm telling you, there's a whole industry. You could go out there and buy Mozart to play in utero for a gestating baby, and people think that then their kids are going to pop out smarter and eager for math and prepared for STEM because they've listened to Mozart. So I mean, like most things, there is a kernel of truth, a tiny, but there's a recklessness about this. So there was one study that found a small, short-term positive effect on cognitive ability that lasted no longer than 15 minutes. It was never observed longer than 15 minutes after people listened to Mozart. And this was published in a leading science magazine. Okay, let's leave aside that people publish such stuff. But it's been, people have attempted to replicate it quite a lot and have been unable to. And it's pretty clear that the effect is explained largely by arousal. That is, listening to music is just stimulating, and then people think better when they're stimulated. So they found that it wasn't just Mozart. You could stimulate people in any way, lots of different ways, and you would get the same extremely short-term effect. But being stimulated doesn't make you smarter, nor does listening to Mozart. And the last example up there from the New York Times. All right, so they published a study that found that if you read literary fiction, that you are more empathetic. And I have to say, I fell for this, okay? I mean, don't worry, we are all susceptible to BS. I fell for it. I thought this was true. It was in the New York Times, right? It's gotta be true. No. What they did is they used this kind of survey mechanism on, I think it's Amazon will gather samples for you, and then they had people read passages from different works of fiction and nonfiction, and then they gave them a test called Reading the Mind and the Eyes test, which you look at a set of eyes and then you have to say what you think that person is thinking based on just looking at their eyes, and the better you are able to do that, the more empathetic you're said to be. And so, as it turns out, there were 2 independent efforts to attempt to replicate it, and they were unable to replicate it. And they pretty much figured out that the way that the study got that effect was by what's called in academia p-hacking. So p-hacking is where you change things about the study until you get a significant result that you like. Okay, and that's pretty clear what they did. In the way that people p-hack in different fields is different, but the way they do it in psychology, as I understand it, is by establishing exclusion criteria so that they exclude subjects as outliers, but they just kept changing the exclusion criteria until they got a sample that gave them the result. They also, post hoc, moved around what was considered literary fiction and what was considered non-literary or lowbrow fiction. So they moved that bar. So was Ray Bradbury, was that literary fiction or was that lowbrow fiction? They moved them between the categories until they got the result. These are all examples of BS. The people who are pervading these are not lying, nor do they think they're wrong. They believe it. So you can spout BS while believing it, but you're spouting it because you are reckless or indifferent about what is true. They're not being careful about whether their claim is true or not because they don't even care. And the reason why they don't care is they're trying to accomplish some other thing that they think is good, like getting you to think that literature is good, getting you to think that art is good, getting you to think that Mozart is good. They think that whatever, as long as it promotes that good thing, it's okay. I don't have to be careful because it's really for a good cause. And I'll use my authority as a researcher to get you to do that. It's aptitude cards. So even when we have really good randomized control trials, and lots of them, we still end up with BS. And this is from a recent study about the effects of randomized control trials involving antidepressants. Okay? And I don't mean to, I'm not an expert enough here to tell you whether on average antidepressants are effective or not effective. The FDA has clearly approved them, believing that they are effective. Clearly it's different for different people, so I'm not making any claim about that. I'm simply describing to you evidence about the effects of antidepressants. So the red dots are studies with null or negative results, and green are positive results. And this first column is a set of 105 randomized control trials, lottery experiments, on the effects of antidepressants. So by chance, some people got antidepressants, by chance, some people got a sugar pill, and then we observed them afterwards. And there were 105 such studies pre-registered with the FDA. So as it turns out, we know the full set of these studies because the Food and Drug Administration required that the studies would have to be pre-registered with them before they knew their results, would have to be registered with them, and that only pre-registered studies would be considered for the approval or disapproval of antidepressants. Okay? So because of that rule, we know the full set of these studies. There are 105. And of the 105, 53 are positive and 52 are negative. That doesn't mean it's a tie, because the positives may be more positive than the negatives are, and the negatives are actually zeros. And so there are actually more sophisticated meta-analytic techniques of combining research to know what the average effect is. But the point is, the literature is overall evenly split about whether these antidepressants were working or not in the original studies. But then the studies have to get published. So as it turns out, all but one of the positive studies got published in a journal. But only half of the negative studies were published in journals. Okay? People like positive results. They like happy results. They don't like unhappy results. And so when we look at the journals to see what are the effects of antidepressants, we now think that it's 2 to 1 positive to negative studies, right? Originally it's 50-50, but given bias in what gets published, it's 2 to 1. But then, when they looked at the abstracts of the studies that were published and compared them against the original pre-registered studies, they could see that a bunch of them switched outcomes so that they could say something positive even when they had negative results. So let's say they had a study where patients did not benefit from the antidepressant. They still reported a positive result by saying the drug was well tolerated. That is, people didn't have adverse side effects, okay? So they found a positive thing to say, and they made the published article about that positive thing, and so that's another type of bias called outcome reporting bias, and so that shifts the literature more towards being positive, because even when the study had a negative result, they switched what the outcome was. But then, even more, they then spin the negative results. So even when they report the outcome that they pre-registered, even when it was negative, they then would spin the outcome and say, well, the result was trending positive. It was on the verge of being positive, this sort of language. And so they were spinning it to be more positive. These are the yellows that you see in the next column. And then they looked at which studies get cited by other researchers. And as it turns out, people like citing positive studies a lot more than they like citing negative studies. So by the time you get to what everyone is talking, so citation is kind of a measure of what is everyone talking about in the research field about antidepressants. By the time you get to that, it's like 90-some% positive. So we started out 50-50, and we end up 90-some% positive. How do we get there? We get there because of BS. This is BS because cumulatively we are not careful about what is true here. Instead, we're focused on what we would like to have happen. We'd like to sell drugs, or we'd like to publish articles, or some other thing that we think is a good thing that makes our recklessness about what is true here okay. And we use our authority as researchers to get there. So that's where we actually know the full set of studies. I don't want to go on too long because I think I'm running a little long. Maybe.
6:05.
Let's just say we have ways of estimating studies that don't exist. And the way we do that is that so this is called a funnel plot, and the line down the middle of that triangle is the average effect of studies. These are studies on social emotional learning interventions in higher education. This is stuff to improve people's grit and whatever, stuff that's going to get them to graduate. And universities love this stuff. So the average effect is that middle line, in the triangle, and the axis, the y-axis there, the one that goes up and down, is essentially a measure of how noisy the estimates are, which is kind of a measure of how big the sample is. So as it turns out, you see there are a bunch of dots that are missing in the lower left. It should be symmetrical. It should be that if that's the average effect, we should see studies that are big studies and small studies that are bigger than the average and smaller than the average. But we're missing all those small, unhappy studies down there. What happened? Well, that's called file drawer bias. That is, when people do small studies, it's not that high cost, they don't have a big investment, people don't know about it. I got a result I didn't like, I put it in my drawer, I go on and I do it again. I don't even have to be lying, I don't have to be a cheat. In fact, almost never are they. Instead, they say to themselves, I didn't do it right. I need to do it better. So they do it again, and they do it again, until they get one that's on the bottom right there. And then that's the study we see. So we can even estimate the studies that don't exist, that are never seen. And they're missing. The unhappy ones are missing. And this is another version of BS, even in causal research. So, yeah, and as it turns out, the effect size the average effect is a fraction. The average benefit is a fraction of what is originally claimed once you make the adjustments for the studies that aren't there. As it turns out, it's close to zero. So all the stuff we're doing for social emotional learning, maybe it's not doing very much. Okay, so why should you study BS? So I think you should take this course. This will be a lot of fun. But also, I think it would be helpful to improve your BS detection. I think this is a main thing that you should get out of being in college, is the ability to distinguish between something that is careful about whether it's true or not, or is not careful, right? And you should have a sense, you have to have a sense for whether you have to investigate more closely. And that's your BS detector, and you have to develop that if you want to not be manipulated by BS. I also think it's really useful to subject your own convictions to critical inquiry to see if you are in fact a purveyor of BS or a believer of BS. We probably all are. I know I certainly am. Rather than going around and pointing at everyone else that everyone else is an idiot and everyone else is full of BS, it might be more productive to think about how we are full of BS so that we can check ourselves and try to be a better version of ourselves that is more committed to truth, more careful, and not a purveyor of BS. And then lastly, I mean, I've been talking about this search for truth stuff, but I mean this, and this is not BS. No, I'm pounding my fist, so this time you know I mean it, it's true. It's not that this is what we are doing in universities, and I know it because I've read Veritate Duce Progredi. Does anyone know what that is?
Isn't it our motto?
What's the matter with you? Yes, it is our motto. It is the motto of the University of Arkansas. It's on the seal. You can see it. It's probably on all the stuff you buy, you know, with the seal. It says that, Veritate Duce Progredi. Anyone know what it means?
Go forth with truth as leader.
Right. Advancing guided by truth. Right, exactly. And I just saw added to the base of the steps of the walkway that leads up to Old Main, the expression ingredere ut proficia sapientia. Anyone know what that means? It means enter to gain wisdom. Okay? And in fact, this is written on an arch, a gateway entering Harvard Yard. It says, actually in English, not Latin, because they're, you know, low class at Harvard. It says, enter to gain wisdom, and on the other side, it says, depart to serve thy country. Now, maybe that's going to be a little bit of BS. But I think, you know, this organization is about something. And if it isn't about truth, then I don't know why we're here. And so we have to kind of commit ourselves and the institution to the central function of the organization, which is truth-seeking. And we can't do it if we are awash in BS, tolerate it, accept it, and promote it ourselves. And so taking this course will help us. So, thanks. Now. I don't know if we
Yeah,
can
we've got
stretch any
time for
further,
some questions.
but you may have other examples you wish to offer that I would be eager to hear about. And I think one of the things that we'll be doing in the class also is we'll go through some examples of what I suspect might be examples of BS. Although you might say, no, Professor Greene, you're full of BS. That's not BS at all, and that's fair game. But you may have, I'll want to hear your own examples, and so we can even try it out a little bit right now. So again, remember, BS is not a lie. It's not false, nor does the person who says it have to be lying or think it's false. They just have to not care, or not be careful about whether it's true or false. So what do you think would be other good examples of BS? Or bad examples too, that's fine too. Yeah.
So you mentioned politics, but often in like campaigns for like presidencies,
Right.
they'll make promises that they never even attempt to complete during their presidency if they gain it. So would that be BS because they don't care whether it's true or not, they're just trying to get hired?
Right, it's like ultra bright will whiten your teeth, or will get you noticed. A chicken in every pot is an old political expression. Everyone will have plenty to eat. Will it be true? No, they don't care.
Yeah.
So yes, certainly, I mean, political campaigns would be be like BS squared because it's advertising in politics, so it's got both. Yeah.
Things parents tell their kids, like, eat all your food, your kid's starving, and name other countries.
Okay, that's a good example when a parent says, eat your food, there are starving children in enter name of country where people are currently starving. It's changed over the years, by the way. It was China when I was a kid, and now, it's like, eat your food. Kids in China are making, advancements in nanotechnology. But, right, so parenting almost certainly is filled with a lot of BS because we tell kids things because we want them to do things, and we're not really focused on whether it's true or not. We just think it's good for them to do it. Now again, not all BS is bad. That might be a tolerable use of BS. What we worry about is if BS corrodes our truth-seeking activity, and we also worry if it undermines, subverts institutions that are supposed to be truth-seeking, because those institutions their authority and their expertise has to be trusted somehow. If they abuse that, then we're left rudderless. And it does feel a little bit like that's where we are right now. I feel rudderless in a world without expertise to help adjudicate what's going on. I can't possibly on my own figure everything out. I don't have the time or knowledge to do that. I have to rely on other people to sort it out for me, but they've proven themselves to be so unreliable that I don't know what to believe anymore, right? This is a very bad thing. This didn't happen overnight. This accumulated over years and years and years of BS. And I don't think our parents, years and years of being told lies about my vegetables, we still love our parents, so that somehow still works out. Other good examples? Yeah.
I'd say like bragging and exaggeration. Sometimes when you exaggerate on an event, when you're telling someone about it, you really are believing it was the case that you were saying to someone.
Fish stories.
Yeah.
Right, and I mean, look, every good salesperson believes what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
And even though we've already established that advertising is mostly BS, people who are really good at it believe it. They believe it when they're selling it, because otherwise you wouldn't believe it too, and so it wouldn't work. So similarly, these kind of fish stories of personal accomplishment and success or whatever, the people who are saying them may well believe them intensely, because then they get other people to believe them as well. But that doesn't prevent it from being BS, which is also why BS is not a lie. To lie, you have to know it's false. And to know it's false, you have to at least know the difference between truth and falsehood, right? But the purveyor of BS doesn't know and doesn't care, right? They just want you to believe or do something. So in the case of fish stories, it would be, I want you to think I'm awesome, right? So I think I don't want to, test your patience too long. This should give you a feeling for what the course will be like, and I look forward to seeing many of you in that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Greene. That was awesome. I'm sure if y'all want to come down and ask individual questions, Professor Greene will be happy to answer them, but have a good evening.